Today we are going to discuss the first three rules for comma placement. Rule number 1, commas separate items in a list of more than two things. If you have just two things, all you need is the and. Once you have more than two things, then you have to start thinking about commas. So here in this first example, we have Beowulf is our first noun, Hrothgar is our second, Wiglaf is our third noun, and all three of them make up the plural subject of the sentence. So since I want to separate the items in the list, I want to be sure my reader knows they are different nouns. The first two are going to be separated by the comma, and the third one doesn't have to be separated by a comma because the and is in there to tell the reader that the third thing is coming up. They don't have to be names of people. They can be anything. They can be verbs. They can be whole clauses. Here we have gerunds, ing verbs that are being used as nouns. Reading, writing, and critical thinking are the nouns that form my compound subject. So I want to tell my reader that reading and writing are two different things. I'm going to put the comma in there, and I put the comma there because I have more than two things, and is going to be the marker that the next thing is going to be a third noun. There is a kind of complication here with these rules separating items in a list of more than two things. The comma before the and is optional. You can put it in there or not, whatever you want, except in two instances when you absolutely must put it in. One of those instances is if one of your items in the list already has an and. So in this case, we have, here's our first noun, vast setting. Here's our second noun, clear heroes and villains. And then here's our very long third noun, the use of supernatural elements. I want to be sure my reader knows that noun number 2, this middle thing here, should be read as a single unit and not as a separate thing. So I want to be sure and put my comma in before the and that finishes the third, that introduces the third item in the list, so that my reader knows to read this second thing as a single noun and not as two separate nouns. The other instance when that might happen is if the items in the list are very long. Technically, I guess you don't have to put it in before the and, but you want to avoid misreading, so you want to help your reader out by putting that comma in there. So here we have an understanding of Anglo-Saxon culture, that's our first noun, it's pretty long, and appreciation for different genres, that's getting even longer, and then the third one, and a sensitivity to the significant gaps between time periods. That's a lot of nouns to keep track of, so I want to be sure my reader knows that here is the beginning of the third noun. I have to put this one in because I have more than two things in my list, so I have to put that first comma in there to separate item number 1 and item number 2. I technically don't have to put this one in here because the and is doing the job, but I want to be sure that my reader understands that this is a separate thing. I don't want them to get lost in all the words, so I'm going to go ahead and put the comma in for that third noun. Okay, rule number 2, comma separating two full sentences joined by and, but, or nor. The key thing here is that full sentences. You could have a sentence with an and in it or a but in it or nor, but that doesn't mean you're going to use a comma. The only time you're going to use the comma is if you have two full sentences on either side. So here we have a subject and a verb on this side of our and. We have on the other side subject and a verb on the other side, two full sentences on either side of the and, so I have to put that comma in there. The comma tells my reader what's coming up. They see the and they might think, oh, is this a live? What's going on with that and? The comma tells them that, hey, there's a full sentence coming up. Change your thinking and don't keep thinking of this as the continuing subject. There's a different subject coming up. Same thing here. Hrothgar starts out as a genuine hero. There's my full sentence, subject and a verb. Here's the but. Just because there's a but, though, doesn't mean that I'm going to use the comma. I will if I have a full sentence on the other side. So check on the other side. Here's my subject, attacks, and it has its own verb, expose, subject and verb on this side, subject and verb on this side. The comma is going to go right in here before the but to tell my reader that two full sentences are being joined here. Rule number 3 is kind of a complex one because you're probably in the mindset of putting commas where they don't belong. Rule number 3 is commas follow a dependent clause that starts the sentence. This is the most important thing. A dependent clause is just a clause that can't stand by itself. It's a fragment. If that fragment thing is the part that starts the sentence, when it's over, you put the comma in. That tells the reader, hey, the dependent clause is over and the main clause is coming. So here, although that's our key word, right? That tells us that we've got a fragment coming up. Although Hrothgar starts out as a genuine hero, my comma is going to mark where the end of that dependent clause is so that my reader knows, okay, stop with the dependent clause, and then here comes the main idea. Here's my subject, attacks, and here's expose. This is the same sentence as we saw over here, where we had the but in, two full sentences being joined by a but, get the comma. This is the same sentence, I've just moved the contrasting word to the beginning. And now that makes a fragment at the start of the sentence, so I put the comma after the end of the dependent clause to tell my reader that the independent clause is coming up. Same thing here. Because, that indicates I've got a dependent clause. Because of Beowulf's love of fame, that's the end of it. I got to tell my reader, done with the dependent clause, here comes the opening of the independent clause. It, here's my subject, is my verb. Okay, here are 4 examples. So stop the video, go through them, make your commas, put in where you're following the first 3 rules, and then review. So number 1, you have a dependent clause that's going to start the sentence. We know that because of the while. So we just have to read to the end to find where the dependent clause stops. While Hrothgar had significant successes early in his rule, that's the end of my dependent clause. So I'm going to put a comma in right there to tell my reader, dependent clause over, independent clause starting. His inability to fight Grendel, protect Herod, and restore order. Here's my list of 3 different things. They happen to be verbs, so I want to put in a comma here. His inability to fight Grendel, protect Herod is optional. I can put it in if I want, or I can leave it out. Doesn't matter, these aren't particularly long phrases, so my reader probably won't get confused. And there's no and in any of the items in the list, so I don't really need it, but you can put it in just to be sure that your reader understands. So this one's optional, this one's required. Okay, in this one, we don't have any commas at all. Here's a because, and you got to get out of the habit of putting in a comma just because you see a because. There's no comma that goes in front of the because. This is our dependent clause, but it's not at the start of the sentence, it's at the end. So I don't need a comma. I know a dependent clause is coming because this word, which is a word that introduces a dependent clause, is right there. I can see that the word is there. I don't need the comma to help me. So here's my subject. We may question Beowulf's heroism, and then here's the dependent clause. No comma goes in here because he is willing to sacrifice some soldiers in order to lure Grendel inside Herod. There's no listing, there's no and, but, or nor. I don't have to worry about compound sentences, and I don't have a dependent clause that starts the sentence, so no comma in this sentence. We can try to read Beowulf in the original Old English. Full sentence on this side. Here's the we, subject, here's our verb, can try. Then I have an or. Just because there's an or in the sentence doesn't mean that I'm going to have a comma. What do I have to do? I have to check on the other side of the or to see if I have a full sentence. I can see that I do. Here's my subject, we. Here's my verb, can try. 2 full sentences joined by the or. I'm going to put the comma in here. That tells my reader, hey, reader, read this or as a conjunction that links full sentence number 1 and full sentence number 2. All right, now our last sentence here about Unferth. Unferth plays the role of a minor antagonist. Full sentence. Here's my subject. Here's my verb, and that's important to note because I have a but. Just because there's a but in the sentence doesn't mean you put a comma. You have to check. Full sentence on this side, full sentence on the other side of the but. If you have that, then you have to put the comma in there. But so we have lack, here's my subject, and here is my verb. Lack is my subject, keeps is my verb, 2 full sentences on either side. I'm going to go ahead and put the comma in there. If I change this sentence somehow on this side and I didn't make it a compound sentence, I didn't have a subject and a verb, then I wouldn't put the comma in there. So Unferth plays the role of a minor antagonist. Let's take out the comma. I want to keep the but. If I want the but not the comma, I have to change this side of the sentence so it's not a full sentence. So how about if we say, but lacks of evil intent. That makes a true villain. So I've kept the same idea. I have my full sentence over here. I have the idea that he lacks the evil intent and that evil intent is what makes a true villain. What I've done, though, is take out the subject on the other side of the but. I have a verb, but I don't have a subject, which means I don't have a full sentence. If I don't have a full sentence on this side of the but, then I don't put a comma in there. All right, so that's it for the first 3 rules of commas. Be sure and review this video as many times as you need to be able to rattle off those rules, and we're going to practice in class next time.